Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the peculiar world of ancient Roman headache remedies. Imagine, if you will, the hum of the Roman Forum fading into the twilight, the faint aroma of cedar and stale bread drifting through the air, and you, a weary Roman citizen, clutching your throbbing temples. Perhaps you've just endured a particularly long and loud session at the public baths, or maybe that last glass of unwatered wine at dinner was a regrettable choice. The pain is persistent, a dull throb behind your eyes making the flickering oil lamp seem intolerably bright. What do? You don't have a discreet little bottle of ibuprofen in your medicine cabinet. No, your options are considerably more inventive and, dare I say, a little alarming. You probably won't survive the night using some of these. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening, tell me where you are and what time it is in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a Roman, and your head feels like a legion has marched through it repeatedly. What's your first port of call? Well, if you were living in a comfortable Roman villa, you might first turn to your household remedies, often concocted by the medicus or even the lady of the house, drawing on generations of folk wisdom. One of the most common and perhaps least unpleasant methods involved, believe it or not, a cabbage leaf. Yes, the humble cabbage. You take a fresh leaf, maybe warmed slightly, and apply it directly to your forehead, hoping its natural properties, whatever they were thought to be, would draw out the pain. It sounds rather quaint, doesn't it? Like something your eccentric grandmother might suggest, rather than a cutting-edge medical intervention from a powerful empire. But the Romans, being practical and a little superstitious, didn't stop at mere vegetables. Their approach to medicine, especially for something as common and debilitating as a headache, was a fascinating blend of empirical observation, inherited wisdom, and outright magical thinking. One mainstream historical fact about Roman medicine is their extensive use of bleeding or venesection for a wide range of ailments, and headaches were no exception. If your headache was particularly severe, a physician might suggest opening a vein, usually in your arm or neck, to release the bad humors believed to be causing the pain. The idea was that an imbalance of these humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, was the root of illness, and draining some blood would restore equilibrium. For you, the patient, this might have been a terrifying prospect, but in the absence of more effective pain relievers, it was a widely accepted practice. You'd lie there, probably feeling quite faint already from the headache. As a barber surgeon, because yes, they were often the ones performing such procedures, made a careful incision. Hopefully the relief would be swift, or at least the ensuing unconsciousness would offer a temporary reprieve. Now for a quirkier tidbit, did you know some Romans believed that strapping an electric torpedo fish, or torpedo marmorata, to your head could cure a headache? No, I'm not making this up. Imagine, you're in agony, and someone suggests you go fishing for an electric eel's cousin. The fish, when alive, could deliver quite a jolt, and it was thought that this shock somehow reset the brain or dissipated the headache-causing energy. You'd likely feel a sudden, unpleasant buzz, a true shocking experience, if you will. And then, perhaps if the shock was strong enough, a temporary numbness or distraction from the pain. Or more likely, you just have a wet, slimy fish flopping on your face while your headache persisted, perhaps even intensified by the sheer absurdity of the situation. Historians still argue whether this was a common practice or more of a fringe, desperate last resort. Was it the shock itself, or the placebo effect of doing something so radical that offered any relief? We can only imagine the conversations. Oh, it's just a mild headache. I'll use some cabbage. If it gets worse, then maybe I'll consider the fish. Another rather peculiar, though perhaps less shocking remedy, involved the use of certain minerals. Lead, for example, was sometimes incorporated into poultices, despite the Romans' general awareness of its toxic properties when ingested. They also used various types of clay, sometimes mixed with vinegar or wine, to form a paste that would be applied to the temples. The idea was that the cool, damp paste would somehow draw out inflammation, or ease the tension in your head. You'd lie there, probably on a plush couch if you were wealthy, with a clay mask setting on your forehead, hoping for relief as the day waned. This wasn't quite the relaxing spa treatment you might envision. It was a medical intervention, however rudimentary. The efficacy of these methods, of course, varied wildly, and many were likely more about the psychological comfort of doing something than any real physiological effect. But in a world without aspirin, every little bit of hope helped. So you've tried the cabbage, perhaps even endured the fish, and your headache stubbornly remains. Your Roman medicus, or perhaps a more learned slave in a wealthy household, might then guide you towards the extensive world of Roman herbalism. This was a realm where practical knowledge passed down through generations truly shone. Unlike the more bizarre or ritualistic cures, many herbal remedies had a basis in the chemical properties of plants, even if the Romans didn't understand the underlying science. You would likely be presented with a bewildering array of dried leaves, barks, and roots, each with its own reputed power. One of the most frequently used herbs for pain, including headaches, was willow bark. Yes, the very plant that eventually gave us aspirin. The Romans weren't synthesizing salicylic acid in laboratories, of course, but they recognized that chewing on willow bark or making an infusion from it could alleviate pain and reduce fever. You'd be instructed to chew on a piece of the bark, perhaps grimacing at its bitter taste, or to drink a tea brewed from it. Imagine lying on your couch, trying to sip a lukewarm, woody-tasting liquid, hoping against hope that this ancient form of nature's aspirin would finally bring some peace to your beleaguered head. It's a testament to ancient observational science that they discovered this property long before modern pharmacology came along. Another common herbal approach involved poultices or compresses made from various aromatic plants. Lavender, for instance, known for its calming properties even today, might be crushed and mixed with a little oil or water, then applied to your temples. Rosemary, too, was a popular choice, believed to improve circulation and reduce inflammation. You'd likely feel the cool, damp sensation of the herbs against your skin, and perhaps a faint, pleasant aroma would waft up, offering a moment of sensory relief amidst the throbbing. The preparation of these herbal remedies was often a meticulous process. Plants would be gathered at specific times of day, perhaps under particular lunar phases, reflecting the blend of practical botany and superstitious belief that permeated ancient life. They might be dried in dark, airy rooms to preserve their potency, then ground or steeped as needed. For the common Roman, accessing these specific herbs might involve a trip to the local market, or relying on the knowledge of a local wise woman or healer who often cultivated their own small medicinal gardens. But not all herbal remedies were quite so benign. Some Roman texts mention the use of hellebore, a highly toxic plant, in very small doses for certain ailments. While not a primary headache cure, its inclusion highlights the fine line Roman physicians walked between medicine and poison. Historians still argue whether the perceived benefits of such potent plants outweighed their inherent dangers, or if the precise preparation methods truly neutralized their toxicity enough for therapeutic use. You, the patient, would be entirely reliant on the expertise, or lack thereof, of your healer. One wrong measurement, one misidentified plant, and your headache could become the least of your worries. Another common practice involved inhaling vapors from certain burning herbs. Sage, chamomile, or even poppy seeds, though the latter, with its opiate properties, would have been used with extreme caution due to its stronger sedative effects, might be tossed onto hot coals or heated stones, allowing you to breathe in the medicinal smoke. You'd probably drape a cloth over your head and the smoldering herbs, creating a makeshift inhalation tent, hoping the aromatic steam would clear your sinuses or soothe your agitated mind. The experience would have been quite immersive, a multi-sensory attempt to conquer your pain. Remember that feeling of congestion when you have a bad cold? This was their ancient equivalent of a steam vaporizer, but with added botanicals. It's easy to imagine the scene. A quiet room, the soft glow of embers, and the distinct scent of dried herbs filling the air as you gently inhale, seeking a moment of peace. The Romans also understood the power of localized application. For instance, the use of a heated brick or stone, wrapped in cloth and infused with herbs, might be placed at the back of your neck or head. The warmth, combined with the herbal properties, was thought to relax tense muscles and improve blood flow, thereby easing the headache. This particular method feels quite relatable even today. Who hasn't used a warm compress for muscle tension? The challenge, of course, was ensuring the heat wasn't too intense, avoiding burns while still achieving the desired therapeutic effect. For a Roman, this might have been a nightly ritual, a familiar part of managing chronic discomfort, rather than a desperate one-off. The soothing warmth, the earthy smell of baked clay and dried herbs, it would have been a comforting ritual, even if the relief was only temporary. If the gentle hum of herbal remedies failed to quell your Roman headache, prepare yourself, because things could get a little unconventional. Beyond the willow bark and calming lavender, the Romans ventured into truly peculiar and sometimes unsettling territory for pain relief. This is where the line between medicine and sheer desperation blurs, and you, the suffering Roman, would likely be willing to try almost anything. One of the most peculiar non-herbal treatments involved the use of animal brains. Yes, you heard that right. Specific animal brains were thought to possess properties that could alleviate pain, particularly headaches. For instance, some texts suggest applying a paste made from the brain of an owl or a dormouse directly to the forehead or temples. Imagine the scene. A dark, quiet room, the air thick with the faint scent of, well, damp animal matter. You'd be lying there trying to relax, while someone gently spread this unappetizing concoction onto your throbbing head. The logic behind this isn't entirely clear to modern historians, but it likely stemmed from sympathetic magic. The belief that qualities of an animal, like the owl's wisdom or quiet flight, could be transferred. Did it work? Almost certainly not in any physiological sense, but the sheer oddity of the remedy might have provided a powerful psychological distraction, or perhaps the cold, damp sensation offered some temporary relief. Historians still argue whether these were widely adopted practices or more desperate. Fringe remedies attempted only when all else failed. Then there were the amulets and charms, a pervasive aspect of Roman daily life, extending even to medical treatment. For a stubborn headache, you might be advised to wear a magical amulet inscribed with certain symbols or words, perhaps made of specific stones or metals. Sometimes these amulets contained pieces of dried herbs or even tiny animal bones. The belief was that the amulet's inherent power or the blessing it carried would ward off the pain-causing evil spirits or negative influences. You'd wear it around your neck or perhaps tie it to your head with a strip of cloth, a constant, tangible source of hope. It's hard to imagine, in our age of clinical trials and scientific proof, relying on a piece of jewelry to cure a migraine. But for the Romans, this was a legitimate avenue of treatment, blending religious belief with practical health concerns. Another rather unsettling practice involved trepanation, which is the drilling or scraping of a hole into the skull. While more commonly associated with severe head injuries or mental illness, where it was believed to release evil spirits, there's some archaeological evidence and historical mention suggesting it was, on rare occasions, considered for chronic, severe headaches. You would certainly not be a willing participant in this unless you were truly at your wits' end. The thought of a surgeon, or rather a skilled craftsman with a sharp tool, slowly boring into your skull while you were likely conscious and certainly in immense pain, is enough to make anyone's headache seem minor. The intent presumably was to relieve pressure on the brain, but the risks of infection, hemorrhage, and death were astronomical. This wasn't a mainstream historical fact for everyday headaches, but a grim last resort that underscores the extreme suffering people endured. And then we come to the truly bizarre, gargling with vinegar that had been poured over a heated sword. This wasn't for a sore throat, mind you, but believed to somehow draw out humors associated with head pain. You'd probably feel a searing sensation, the sharp tang of vinegar, and the metallic taste, all while wondering if this was truly helping or just adding to your misery. The steam from the hot vinegar was likely meant to act as a counter-irritant or an inhalant, but the specific ritualistic element of the sword suggests a strong superstitious component. It brings to mind the kind of wild experimental kitchen chemistry you might attempt when desperate, only on a much more perilous scale. One quirkier tidbit to consider: some Roman texts hint at the use of crocodile dung in poultices for various ailments, though its specific application for headaches is less documented than for, say, skin conditions. However, the general principle was that animal excrement, particularly from exotic animals, possessed unique medicinal properties. So, while you might not have been smearing it directly on your temples for a headache, it shows the lengths to which they went and the unusual substances they incorporated into their medical practices. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen? Well, this isn't too far off in terms of peculiar ingredients. The thought of it is certainly enough to make you forget your headache, if only for a moment of sheer disbelief. Now, as a Roman citizen suffering from a headache, your access to these various bizarre, herbal, or surprisingly practical remedies wasn't a universal given. Your social status played a surprisingly significant role in what kind of treatment you received, and perhaps, more importantly, who provided it. This introduces a fascinating layer to the history of Roman headache cures. If you were a wealthy patrician, a senator, or a member of an affluent family, your experience would be vastly different from that of a common plebeian or a slave. You would likely have a dedicated medicus in your household, or at least regular access to one of the more reputable Greek physicians practicing in Rome. These physicians, often highly educated, would have knowledge of a wider range of herbal remedies, sometimes even having their own private gardens for cultivating medicinal plants. They would be more likely to recommend less outlandish, though still peculiar, treatments based on established medical texts, even if those texts were still rooted in ancient theories of humors. You might receive carefully prepared infusions, complex poultices, or even be advised on dietary changes or specific exercises, all delivered with a certain air of scholarly authority. The cost of such expertise would have been prohibitive for most, ensuring that the best, or at least the most expensive care, was reserved for the elite. Imagine being able to recline in comfort, attended by a professional who calmly prepares a soothing compress for your aching head, rather than rummaging for a dubious fish. Contrast this with the plight of a common Roman citizen, perhaps a baker or a carpenter. You certainly wouldn't have a personal physician on retainer. Your first recourse would likely be folk remedies, passed down through families, similar to the cabbage leaf trick. You might visit a local taberna shop that sold dried herbs, relying on the shopkeeper's advice or the wisdom of an elder. For more persistent pain, you might turn to a local wise woman or a less formal healer in your neighborhood. These individuals often operated outside the mainstream medical establishment, offering remedies that blended traditional herbalism with a stronger emphasis on charms, incantations, and local superstitions. Their treatments might include those more eccentric methods we discussed, like applying animal brains or specific mineral pastes, born more from desperation and old wives' tales than empirical observation. The cost would be much lower, perhaps a simple barter for goods or a small sum of coins, making it accessible but also far less regulated. For a slave, the situation was even more dire. Your health, including your headaches, was largely dependent on the benevolence of your owner. A valuable slave, perhaps one with a specific skill, might receive some basic medical attention to ensure their continued productivity. This could involve simple herbal remedies or basic care from another slave with some medical knowledge. However, if your headache was severe and debilitating, you might be deemed less useful, and the treatment, if any, would be minimal. One mainstream historical fact about Roman slavery is that slaves were considered property, and their well-being was often secondary to their economic value. So, while a wealthy Roman might fret over the efficacy of a specialized herbal tea, a slave might simply be told to work through the pain or given the most rudimentary and cheapest of interventions. Historians still argue whether some of the more brutal or risky treatments, like rudimentary surgery, were ever imposed on slaves without their consent, simply to cure them of a debilitating ailment. Even the environment played a role. Wealthy Romans had access to private baths, clean water, and spacious, well-ventilated homes, which might have contributed to better overall health and perhaps fewer headaches to begin with. The poor, living in crowded, often unsanitary insula, apartment blocks, were constantly exposed to various ailments, making effective headache relief even more crucial. The sheer physical strain of daily labor for the common folk or slaves would also contribute to tension headaches, making soothing remedies even more sought after. You, toiling in the sun in a dusty Roman workshop, would feel that headache differently than a patrician enjoying a leisurely afternoon. This disparity highlights not just the difference in medical knowledge, but the profound impact of social stratification on basic human suffering. The privileged could afford to experiment with slightly less dangerous, if still odd, treatments, while the less fortunate often had to resort to the most desperate and sometimes truly grim methods available born of necessity rather than choice. As we gently drift from the peculiar headache remedies of ancient Rome, it's worth taking a moment to reflect on how these practices, however bizarre, echo in our modern understanding of pain and healing. You've journeyed through cabbage leaves, electric fish, and even the faint, unsettling whiff of animal brains. While we now have sophisticated pharmaceuticals and a much deeper understanding of neurology, the core human desire to alleviate suffering and the blend of hope, observation, and even superstition in that pursuit remains surprisingly constant. Consider the placebo effect. Many of the Roman remedies, particularly the more outlandish ones, likely derived any perceived benefit from the sheer belief in their efficacy. When you, a Roman, desperately applied that dormouse brain paste, the act of doing something, combined with the healer's confidence and your own deep-seated hope for relief, could very well have triggered your body's own natural pain relief mechanisms. Modern medicine understands this powerful psychological component, and it's a mainstream historical fact that placebos can induce real physiological changes. Historians still argue whether ancient healers consciously exploited this effect, or if it was an unintended benefit of their fervent belief systems. Perhaps they understood that a compelling ritual, no matter how strange, could sometimes soothe a troubled mind, even if it didn't directly address a physical ailment. Think about the willow bark. That discovery centuries before aspirin demonstrates a timeless connection between humans and the natural world. The Romans didn't know about salicylic acid, but they observed, tested, presumably, and passed down knowledge that plants held medicinal properties. Even today, many pharmaceutical drugs have their origins in botanical compounds. You might easily find a modern-day herbalist recommending willow bark tea, just as your Roman counterpart would have. This continuity highlights humanity's persistent search for natural remedies and the enduring wisdom gleaned from observing the plant kingdom. The soothing warmth of a herbal compress or the calming scent of lavender are experiences that transcend millennia. Connecting your quiet, sleepy moment now with a Roman's attempt to find peace from pain. Even the concept of balancing humors, though scientifically debunked, reflects an ancient attempt to understand the body as an interconnected system. They perceived illness as an imbalance, and their treatments, whether bleeding or purgatives, were aimed at restoring that balance. While our understanding is vastly different, modern holistic approaches to health still emphasize equilibrium within the body, albeit through much more nuanced and evidence-based methods. It's a quirky tidbit that the Romans, despite their vast empire and engineering marvels, were still operating on theories that seem almost quaint to us now, yet their underlying goal, restoring internal harmony, is remarkably similar. So, as you slowly drift off, consider the enduring human experience of pain, and the equally enduring human spirit of ingenuity, hope, and even a touch of eccentricity in seeking relief. The Romans, with their peculiar cures, were just like you, searching for comfort at the end of a long, bustling day. Perhaps, as your consciousness gently recedes, you can imagine the quiet, rhythmic breathing of a Roman citizen, a bit of cabbage leaf on their forehead, finally succumbing to the gentle embrace of sleep. The bustling marketplace fades, the distant clang of blacksmiths quiets. The soft flicker of the oil lamp dims to a faint glow. Your ancient Roman headache, like all worries, begins to recede. Thoughts become wisps, floating on the soft currents of history. Letting go, finding ease, sinking deeper into the quiet stillness, breathing slowly, gently, letting sleep wash over you, a soothing tide, until morning.